Yet another report on the 2019 general elections. This time by the Elections Situation Room. They say the conduct of the elections is not good enough. And President Muhammadu Buhari says that the federal government will deploy drones and CCTV cameras to help arrest the latest spate of banditry, kidnappings, and other crimes across the country. Hello everyone and welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimberly at Channels Television's global headquarters. The proceedings begin tonight from these hallowed chambers of our studio at Channels Television's global headquarters. Loads and loads of stuff to talk about tonight. It's a 1 hour stretch of program, different from the other day. So let's begin with what President Buhari said about security. He says that it's going to be working with the state governments and FG intend to beef up the equipping of the police force with advanced technology and equipment that can facilitate the work of the security agencies. The president says that he will be issuing directives to the appropriate federal authorities to speedily approve licensing for states requesting the use of drones to monitor forests and other criminal hideouts. Adding that they also intend to install CCTVs on highways and other strategic locations so that activities in some of those hidden places can be exposed more effectively and to be monitored and open to actionable review. President Buhari met with some traditional rulers today at the State House. After the meeting, the Oni of Ife says the president has promised to fast-track rapid monitoring of forests and bushes through the use of aerodrones and CCTVs, which have already been ordered to be installed strategically along the highways. The traditional ruler mentioned this after the meeting with the president, where he told journalists that the president equally gave an assurance that the entire security architecture of the country would be restructured. The president also played host to the Olu of Warri, Ogiame Ikewoli, and the Senate President Ahmed Lawan at the State House. While the Olu of Warri also told journalists that he discussed issues of security and the Benin Ore Road with the president. Details of the Senate President meeting was, however, not made public. But here is what the Oni of Ife said after the meeting.
They've listened to every detailed issues we've been having in Southwest, and they've preferred solutions. Today, the Inspector General of Police was present, and the entire security architecture of the country will be restructured. And we're very happy about it. Community policing, so that they will recruit policemen and police officers. With all this, we believe there will be a lot of that reduction in tension going on in Southwest, because Southwest is very sensitive in Nigeria. We don't pray for any issue, we don't pray for war, we don't pray for uprising, because it will snowball to a lot of things.
Well, that's one side of some of the issues that a nation is facing. There are a series of other issues. One of it is what we're going to be talking about tonight, and it's going to be a 1 hour stretch of program. So get a seat, perhaps get some fuel into your generator so it can last you for longer, or plug your mobile device, whatever you may be watching. Let's check out some other political stories we have for you.
The president is continuing his defense against the petition filed by the People's Democratic Party, challenging his election as president on February 23, 2019. President Muhammadu Buhari's counsel, Mr. Wale Olanipekun, today invited 4 witnesses, including a deputy registrar in charge of exam registration at the West African Examination, Mr. Henry Adewumi, and the president's senior special assistant in domestic affairs, Mr. Sadiki Alba. Mr. Adewumi told the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal that the West African Examination Council had no hand in the issuance of results to President Muhammadu Buhari by the Cambridge University International Assessment Education. The governor of Delta State, Ifeanyi Okowa, is reacting to the outburst of some party leaders in the state attacking him because of his appointment. The governor alleges that these leaders have taken to the pages of newspapers and social media to attack his office and his personality because he turned down preferred commissioner nominees from them. Speaking during the swearing-in of his former spokesman, Mr. Charles Aniagu, and 16 others as commissioners and members of the State Executive Council, while he urged political leaders to apply decorum in their utterances to avoid heating up the polity. Some female participants at the roundtable meeting on national and security issues for political stability organized by the Abdul Salami Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development Studies have raised concern over the lack of inclusion of women in peace-building process in Nigeria. They say that women are the most vulnerable in conflict situations, particularly the insurgency in the northeast, and want the government to recognize the role of women in conflict resolution and mediation. The Nasarawa State Governor, Abdullahi Sule, is worried about the security situation of the state. The governor revealed that he would improve the security architecture of the state using 3 approaches, comprising of youth empowerment, investment in agriculture, and collaboration with traditional rulers. 2 groups in the All Progressives Congress in Kwara State are expressing different views over the choice of ministers from the state. While the Kwara North youth of the party felt disappointed on the non-inclusion of an indigene from their area, those from Kwara Central thanked the president for the 2 choices.
Off we go, everyone. The Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room says the 2019 general elections failed to meet the requirements for credible elections, as the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, went into the exercise without fixing the shortcomings identified with the 2015 elections. Speaking at a news conference in Abuja yesterday, the civil society groups insist that the polls were characterized by violence, intimidation, and militarization. According to the group, the 2019 elections also recorded a higher percentage of voters' apathy when compared to that of 2015. Let's take a look at some of the findings of the groups. On the issues of concerning INEC, they said that INEC failed to consider the shortcomings of the 2015 election to build on fixing and ensuring that 2019 election is properly conducted. They also talked about the political parties, saying that there was a flagrant abuse of electoral laws by the 2 main political parties in the land, including issues of vote buying, intimidation, and use of hate speech and fake news. Talk about militarization of the elections. They said troops were deployed nationwide during the elections without any clear coordination with INEC. The Situation Room also said they received reports of incidents of partisan involvement in the elections by military, particularly in Rivers State. One of also their last finding is that some of the state institutions were used. They specifically said the security forces, especially the Department of State Services, the security police, state security police, but also the military and the police on many occasions put themselves in overbearing roles on behalf of partisan interests. Those are some of their findings. We come to their recommendation in a short while. Let's get talking on this one, everyone. Let me introduce my panel to you tonight. I have a partner of that Situation Room and the country head of Osiwa, Mr. Jude Ilo is also a lawyer. Thank you so much, Mr. Ilo, for coming on. And we have, Mr. Okoye used to be part of the CSOs, but is a national commissioner with INEC this time around. I don't know how you feel speaking, especially when you're sitting side by side with Jude. I hope that the conversations tonight will be frank on how we can improve our electoral process. Let me begin with you, Jude, tonight. What we saw in the 2019 election, your group is not happy. You believe that we could do better and that 2019 election fell short of what elections in Nigeria as of today should be like. What other concerns do you have?
Thank you, Sean. INEC is just one part of the election framework. And when the Election Situation Room issued the threshold document, the responsibility for ensuring the success of the election was on an INEC, on political parties, other state institutions, security agencies, and the behavior, the collective behavior of all these institutions and all these variables was what informed the assessment that the elections were not credible. It is instructive to note, Sean, that in the 2019 election, we recorded between the day the campaign was opened and up until the end of the governorship election and re-election, more than 600 Nigerians lost their lives in what was related political and electoral violence. And so if you start off from that premise that we're losing this amount of people in a process that's supposed to be routine, that's supposed to be an opportunity for Nigerians to exercise their franchise, it gives you something to worry about. It gives you a pause. And also keep in mind that in this election, INEC staffs were killed in this election. We heard from INEC also that some of their staffs were raped. We heard in this election that an INEC official was forced in Imo State to declare results. And the report also is contained narrative of INEC state commissioners who were hijacked and compelled or were being forced to, play games with the numbers. So if you approach this election just from the point of view of safety and security, you've got a problem already. Then add this to the issue of logistical challenges that we experienced, during the election. The fact that we had to postpone 6 hours to the opening of polls. The fact that even after that postponement, there were issues of, there were logistical challenges across the country. The fact that in very many places, before cameras, electoral materials were snatched, people were chased away from voting. All of this presented an environment that fell short of what a democratic election is supposed to be. And we as a country cannot hold ourselves to mediocre standards. We turned the corner in 2015, and we believe that this election should have been an improvement, at the minimum. It should maintain that standard. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And so, for a lot of people, it is a time for us to pause and ask ourselves the important question: how can we make this right? Because if we continue in this trajectory...
Jude, for a moment, let me turn to Festus for a moment. Okay. Mr. Okoye, let's talk about the things that concern INEC, since you have the benefit of your presence on the program tonight. One of those things that annoyed a lot of Nigerians was the fact that the commission came less than 24 hours to change the date of the election in the first instance. A lot of people believe that INEC did not do well in that regard, as INEC realized that failure in his own stead.
Well, the commission can be said to be a victim of its own optimism. Up to the period we called off that particular election, we believed that we could have pulled it off. The challenge was that if we were going to go ahead with that particular election, on the day we said we were going to conduct the election, we could have done a what I call differential timing of the election. In other words, some polls were going to open around 8, some were going to open around 10, and some were going to open around 11 o'clock. We put all these things into consideration and put them in a basket and made a determination that it was politically unwise for us to do a differential opening of polls, given the diversity of the country and also given the type of political environment we are operating in. So we decided, in the interest of the country and in the interest of even the political parties and in the interest of everybody, to call off the election at that point in time. Yes, it was very, very painful, and the commission acknowledged the fact that it was painful. Yes, we could have called off the election earlier if we were not optimistic that we could have pulled it through, because a lot of people traveled during their particular election, and the commission has said that it was also disappointed that the election had to be called off. So I really believe that it was in the national interest that we called off the election. It would have been very, very tragic for us to go into an election with that particular mindset, and then at the end of the day, there will be breakdown of law and order. So we felt that rather than orchestrate a situation where we are going to have breakdown of law and order, that we needed to apologize to the Nigerian people and do a good election that the people of Nigeria will be proud of.
Mr. Okoye, a lot of people who know the workings of INEC have criticized INEC. I'm very sure you have read a lot of opinions on what happened on the day. A lot of people believe that you did not need to change anything for example, in terms of logistics. You did this election in 2015. You got it almost right. Professor Jega failed. Professor Jega led INEC had this kind of issue too in 2011 when elections were shifted on the day of the election at about noon on that day in 2011. So, but 2015 was an improvement on 2011. There were criticism of INEC on the fact that INEC did not need to change anything or to use a magic wand, since you have some of the senior staff or some of your directors or some of your senior staff who worked with INEC in 2015 who are still on board. So why did you not use some of their experience?
Well, look, with the commission, we believe that we conducted a good election. We believe that the election we conducted was in substantial compliance with the dictates of the Constitution and the dictates of the law. And we also believe that the outcome of the presidential election reflects the will and the voting preferences of the Nigerian people. Now, the challenges of the 2019 elections were slightly different from the challenges of the 2015 election. One, we went into the 2019 election with 91 political parties, and 73 of those political parties were on the presidential ballot. Secondly, we also went into the election from an acrimonious party primary elections. As at the day, even before we called off the election, some of the party primary elections were already in court. Some were in the Supreme Court. And in some of those party primary elections, the lower courts had asked us to remove the logo of some of the political parties from the ballot. So the challenge was, what if the Supreme Court gives judgment a day to the election and says restore the logo of the political party on the ballot? What was the commission going to do? So based on this, we also became slightly proactive, and we printed one set of ballot papers with the party logo and another set without the party logo. So there were significant challenges that we faced during the election. Moreover, no two elections can really be said to be the same. Yes, there were some senior staff of the commission that were still available, and we benefited from their own experiences. But we believed in the commission that we could have pulled off that particular election. But when we realized that there were significant logistic challenges that makes it impossible or made it impossible for us to proceed with that particular election, we also had the presence of mind and the courage to apologize to the Nigerian people and postpone the said election. So we benefited from senior staff that were available, but the challenges were such that we couldn't, in good conscience, proceed with that election on the day we had the earlier fixed.
Mr. Okoye, let me ask you, frankly, you're speaking to millions of Nigerians. A lot of them who love you so much, especially because you were a civil rights activist at some point. Now that you are in a setup where you're a bit
not at some point. I'm still a civil rights activist.
But yeah, we can't refer to you as a civil rights activist at the moment. You are a national commissioner with INEC. But frankly speaking, Mr. Okoye, there has been criticism that the 2019 election fell short of some of the standards. Do you agree that 2015 elections was better conducted than 2019?
Well, I will not engage in that comparison. For the 2019 elections, I believe fervently and firmly that the commission conducted a good election. I also believe that the election we conducted was in substantial compliance with the law and the Constitution. And I also believe very fervently that it reflects the wishes and voting pattern of the Nigerian people. But that does not mean that the commission did not record some challenges with that particular election. It was because of some of the challenges we recorded that we are also engaged in in-house review and evaluation of our performance during the 2019 elections. I have pointed out that we had challenges with the conduct of party primary elections, and that some of the political parties did not do well with the conduct of party primary elections. I've also pointed out that there were concerted efforts and attempts to undermine the commission through the burning of some of the offices of the commission and through the burning of some of the smart card readers in some of the states of the federation. There was also a concerted effort to undermine the places from where the commission recruits its collation officers, its presiding officers, and other ad hoc staff. So some of these things are what we are reviewing. We've had meetings with our some of our presiding officers, electoral officers, the media, civil society groups and organizations, the political parties and so on. And all the views from all these places, we are harvesting all of them. Now, there are things that are short-term and there are things that are long-term. Those critical issues, those critical recommendations that are actionable from the report of civil society groups and organizations, from the report of international organizations that observe the elections, and also from our own internal processes, those ones we can implement administratively, we are going to go ahead and implement them. And
all right, that said, Mr. Okoye, just for a moment, let me butt in. We'll take a pause on the program. We will go on break. I'm not sure Jude agrees with you entirely because I could see him and his gesture there. But we'll take a break on the program. When we come back, we'll have a more robust conversation. We have representatives of with political leanings. Reno Omokri will be joining us on the program from London. He's on Skype waiting to join the conversation. Ayo Yalawa of the APC will also join us on the conversation tonight on the program. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. That's the group today having a press conference on the election a day after the Civil Society Situation Room held their press conference on the review of the 2019 elections, where we've been talking about the 2019 elections, some of the shortcomings, and what should be done to ensure that coming elections are better. I've been talking with National Commissioner of INEC, Mr. Festus Okoye from our Abuja studio. Mr. Jude Ilo is a country head of Osiwa and also a partner with the CSO's election situation room. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Jude is also a lawyer. And we have on the program tonight Mr. Reno Omokri, an award-winning, a best-selling author, and also a lawyer. He joins us from London. I'll be coming to you shortly in another moment. Let me come to you, Mr. Hilo, before we talk about some of the recommendations and the way forward. You agree with Mr. Okoye on the stance of INEC about this election? Do you?
No, I don't. for a number of reasons, Seun. Just for starters, the election was conducted on a voter register that was compiled by INEC. You will recall that during the announcement of the presidential election, it was clear that the number of voters as recorded by INEC before the election was different from the number of voters released by INEC after the election. We're talking about a discrepancy of more than 1.7 million voters. They couldn't find their names in the voters' roll when they went to the polling station. And for me, this is a fundamental problem because this is the basis within which you're conducting the election. We talk about the collation process and the various cases of interference that were recorded, both by the military, by political parties, and sometimes in connivance with INEC officials. And it wasn't just isolated cases. These were widespread across the country. We talk about the party primaries, which everybody agrees was shambolic, because the parties, the major political parties, did not in their primaries respect the rules. There were cases of imposition, buying of votes during the primary, during the election. And when you start off with party primaries that is both fundamentally polluted by this kind of malpractice, it then seeps into the electoral process. Even the concept of choice, which is an integral part of the voting process, is already compromised, even before you come to the operations of INEC. But the operations of INEC were not also adequate. So we talked about the voters register. We talked about the discrepancies in numbers. I mean, from the data gathered from 30 states, for instance, between the people who were recorded to have voted in the National Assembly election and people who voted in the presidential election at the same time, in the same polling station, there was a discrepancy of more than 1.6 million. There were cancellation of polls across the country. And INEC has not been able, in some cases, to give us clear reasons why these elections were cancelled. And the accusation is that these elections were cancelled in places where it would have favored one group over the other. When you put all of this together, the militarization of the process, the cancellation of polls that made it impossible for some people to vote, the inadequacy of the voters' roll, the compromise of the collation process, it is then difficult for you to say that the election was credible.
All right.
I know Festus has, used a very technical legal term about substantial compliance. Well, I mean, that is up to the court to decide whether there was substantial compliance. But placed side by fundamental principles of democratic election internationally and by our local framework, no, it did not meet the threshold of credibility.
Let me ask you a pointed question here, Jude. 2015, a lot of people believe that it was an improvement on 2011 election. In years past, 2003, 98, 2007, a lot of people believe that, in fact, in some places in Nigeria, elections were not really conducted, votes were just written. Would you say that 2019 election was perhaps the worst you've seen in the last 4 or 5 election cycles?
No, I wouldn't say that, Sean. I wouldn't say it's the worst I've seen. We have to put this in context. 2003, 2007, of course, 2007 for me was the worst of all. These were elections that we had issues with. There were fundamental challenges. 2007 was perhaps one of the greatest embarrassments in terms of democratic election in Nigeria. And then we moved to 2011. There was some improvement. 2015, more improvement. It is expected that it becomes a trajectory of growth. My worry, Sean, is that if we normalize what has happened in 2019, or if we begin to pat ourselves on the back and encourage and clap for ourselves for a job well done, and we continue with that precedence, we will get to a point where Nigerians may not even show up to vote. Imagine the fact that we had more people in the voters' roll, more political parties, but the lowest turnout since the return to democracy in 1999. So that should send a message to us that people are getting frustrated. And we should conduct elections where we don't have to debate whether or not it was adequate.
Okay.
We should be conducting elections where we are talking about how good is this election.
Let me come in here quickly. I will come to Mr. Okoye, but let me allow you hear from perhaps some other people who are not happy with the election so that you can respond to it, Mr. Okoye. Reno Omokri, we perhaps know he has a popular stand, and we know where your political leanings are or is. I know you supported the Atiku Peter Obi in the presidency at the time. Reno Omokri, by the way, is a lawyer in Nigeria based in the United States. Thank you so much, Reno, for joining us on the program. What do you make of the 2019 elections?
Well, the 2019 elections were not credible. But before I go further, I need to say that my political party is Nigeria. My political party is Nigeria. It gave expression in the 2019 elections through Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi. But my political loyalties are to Nigeria. Now, the 2019 elections were not credible. I read the report by the civil society situation room, and I do agree with it. I mean, it gave some pointers, but I even have more details. For example, in the civil society situation report, they said that the figures given by INEC for voter registration before the elections contradict the figures announced by INEC as results. And I'll give you an example. Akwa Ibom is probably the most peaceful state in Nigeria, yet Akwa Ibom had lower voter turnouts than they did in 2015. Their voter turnout in Akwa Ibom, I believe it was less than 50%. It was about 39%. Meanwhile, Borno State, which is the most violent state, it's the most war-torn or terrorist-prone state in Nigeria. On the day of the election, they had several terrorist incidents. Meanwhile, Borno State was able to bring about a voter turnout of 73%. How is that possible? I mean, it's just the elections were not credible. And we've seen this administration and INEC, they've been reading out figures and saying that foreign governments had affirmed this election, but we've seen that it was a pack of lies. Just last week, the United States government issued travel bans, visa bans on identified individuals. Now, I know some of these individuals, but it's not right. It's undiplomatic for me to mention their names. But I do know for a fact that the British government will be coming up with their own visa bans in the next 2 weeks. We are working now to see if the EU can also follow suit. But those elections were not credible, and General Muhammadu Buhari, he rigged himself back into power. He is not a legitimately elected president. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's a usurper, a pretender to the throne.
Okay, I'll come back to you because there are other issues that we'll discuss on the program tonight. And we'll also get the views that are contrary to yours on the program. Let me allow Mr. Festus Okoye to react quickly to some of these concerns and what INEC is doing. Our purpose tonight is to look at the recommendations in getting things better. If you look at some of the recommendations made by the Situation Room, they did talk about the electoral law, which was not signed into law, the issues of logistics, the amount being spent on elections, and the issues of security. What is INEC doing to make Nigerians happy? Obviously, some people are not happy.
Well, we have conducted our internal review. As I pointed out, we met with presiding officers, we've met with electoral officers, we've also met with selected collation officers that we use for the collation of the governorship and presidential elections. And then we've also met with civil society groups and organizations, with political parties, and also with the media. And all these groups have made their own recommendations. As I pointed out, we are looking at the critical recommendations that are actionable. For instance, at the level of the legal framework, we have also harvested some recommendations that we are following up. One, the timeline for the filing and disposal of pre-election matters is problematic. The Commission is also looking at a situation where all pre-election matters can be determined even before we go into the elections proper. Secondly, we're also looking at the place of the smart card reader in the electoral process. In some places, some of the political parties and some of the candidates and some of their political talks decided to bypass the smart card reader and intimidated some presiding officers into conducting the elections without the smart card reader. We're also looking at our own regulations and guidelines to see how we can improve it. You know that at the polling unit level, we try to improve the collation of results, the collation process, by designing a form that enables everybody to have the result in real time by getting the presiding officers to paste the results of the polling unit at the polling unit so that everybody will have access to the results. These are some of the things we did in order to improve the regime of the electoral process, to make it more transparent, to make it more accountable, and also to make it more credible. But as I say, we are still collating some of the views from domestic observers, from international domestic observers, and also from a variety of stakeholders. And we are going to look at the ones that are critical and implement the ones that we can implement administratively.
We need to go now, and I'll allow Jude in just 30 seconds to give some of the most critical recommendations that have been made by Situation Room. What would that be? What should INEC be doing urgently?
Ashen, quickly, the biggest challenge in election is the political parties and the politicians in Nigeria. So this is not about APC or PDP. I believe strongly that either of the parties, if they see the opportunity to undermine the elections, they will. So that we say that the elections are not credible doesn't in any way endorse PDP that they will do the opposite. No, both parties were both complicit in undermining the election. And to that extent, I think the reform should start from the political parties. The need for them to look inward and begin to run political parties that have some decency and respect for the rule of law and the rules of democracy. The second point is that INEC as an institution should, in my view, and in the view of the report, subject itself to an independent audit. I think it is important that some other people can look at INEC processes and advise INEC on what can be done differently to strengthen its mechanism so that the language of INEC at the national level should be the language of INEC at the state level.
All right.
That disconnect has been one of the major problems in the process of INEC.
All right, Jude Ilo, the head of country at Osiwa and one of the partners of the Election Situation Room, and also Mr. Festus Okoye, many thanks for coming on the program tonight. Let me turn to Reno Omokri, and I will get your view on what you make of what happened in the screening of President Buhari's cabinet. As a Nigerian, are you impressed by some of the people that you saw there that appeared for the 3 member list of the ministers designate that we have presently? What is your view on it?
Well, when I saw the list, my first impression was that I hope the president wasn't going senile and that he had mistakenly sent the list that he was meant to send to the EFCC for
Sorry,
corruption.
apologies. Mr. Mokri, please,
Yeah.
can you be kind enough with the use of language, especially to a president who is the #1 citizen of the land? There's some language that may not be permitted right here on this platform. We need to respect the use of language. Please, kindly.
No, I didn't say that the president was senile. I did not say so. I said that when I saw that list, I had fears because, I was thinking that perhaps the man had made a mistake and sent the list he meant to send to the EFCC for prosecution, that he sent that list to the National Assembly. Maybe he confused the list that he was meant to send to the EFCC. Because if you look at that list, obviously it's a who is who in the corruption World Cup. Look at the people on that list. You look at someone like Akpabio, for instance. It's obvious. Akpabio, the EFCC had the biggest corruption case ever. Now, this is the biggest corruption case ever, 108 billion.
But we have heard that EFCC said they don't. Do you have any evidence against to that?
Obviously, I have. Obviously, I have evidence. The EFCC released statements by itself on 2015. 2016. Now you can Google it. As I'm speaking to you, as I'm speaking on this program right now, your viewers at home can actually Google it. The EFCC released statements. They grilled him. One of the statements said that they seized a school from his wife. Another statement said that he had made a gift of 1.4 billion naira to a bank. Now look, I'm saying this live. Now, if I'm lying, I challenge Akpabio to sue me to court, and I challenge the EFCC to sue me to court. These were statements, these were findings that were released to the press by the EFCC. Now, it's not just Akpabio. The list is a who is who in corruption. I'll give you another example. Timi Pre-Silva, it's really funny because Timi Pre-Silva was prosecuted by the EFCC, and when the EFCC was prosecuting him, the EFCC hired a consultant. The name of that consultant is Festus Keyamo. Festus Keyamo was actually the lawyer who prosecuted Timi Pre-Silva in his 19 billion case with the EFCC, where the EFCC also seized 48 houses from him. Now, it's so funny that the man who prosecuted Timi Pre-Silva and Timi Pre-Silva himself will sit at the Federal Executive Council to decide the fate of Nigeria. Isn't that funny? Take a look at somebody.
Let me pause you for a moment, Mr. Mokri, because we will take a break, but we will come back. We're since being joined also on the program by Ayo Oyalawo, a member of the APC, a development expert and economist, who will be talking to us when we return from this break. Join us again, everyone.